My name is Rachel, and this is my story. Growing up, my life was all about church, family, and the simple truths my parents held dear. My dad, Thomas, was a deacon, and my mom, Mary, led the women's group. I always tried to be the good daughter they wanted. I wore modest dresses, sang in the choir, and never missed a Sunday service. But life at home wasn't just prayers and Bible study. It was also filled with the constant tug-of-war between my parents and my older brother, David. David was different. He had this fire in him, a passion for music that didn't fit into our parents' world. I remember him as a kid, always tapping rhythms on the kitchen table, eyes alive with dreams bigger than our small town. Then came his teenage years, and with it, the electric guitar. He was a natural, and soon he formed a band. They called themselves Rebels Echo. It was like a declaration of his new life, away from the expectations of our parents. Our parents didn't understand. They saw his music as a path away from faith. "He's lost," they'd say with a sigh. I'd sit there, listening, feeling torn between loyalty to my family and the love for my brother. Despite their disapproval, David and I stayed close. We'd talk on the phone late at night, him sharing stories of his gigs, me whispering about life at home. He was my window to a world beyond our small town, a world I yearned to explore, but never dared to. Then came Michael, my husband, or as I thought back then, the love of my life. He was older, a friend from church. Michael was everything my parents admired, kind, successful, and deeply religious. We dated briefly, and before I knew it, there was a ring on my finger and a promise of forever. Our wedding was beautiful but bittersweet. David wasn't there. Mom and Dad insisted, and I, as always, didn't argue. Michael held my hand, his smile warm, but my heart ached for my brother. As we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel a part of my world was missing. After the wedding, we moved into Michael's house. It was a cozy place, filled with the promise of a happy future. But as I unpacked my things, I couldn't shake off the feeling of something missing. I remember Michael noticing my distant look. "Everything okay, Rachel?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Yeah, just thinking about David," I replied, forcing a smile. "He's made his choices, Rachel. We need to focus on our life, our future," he said, a hint of firmness in his voice. I nodded, knowing he was right. But deep down, I couldn't let go of the bond I shared with my brother, no matter how far our paths had diverged. The first few months of marriage felt like a dream. Michael was attentive and caring, always making sure I was happy. Our days were filled with shared laughter and long talks into the night. He'd often surprise me with small gifts or a bouquet of flowers, just because. "Morning, beautiful." He'd greet me every day with a kiss, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Good morning," I'd reply, my heart fluttering with happiness. We'd spend weekends exploring nearby towns, trying out little diners, and walking hand in hand by the riverside. Everything felt perfect, like a life I had only imagined in my dreams. But as time passed, I began to feel a bit restless. I loved being with Michael, but there was a part of me that wanted more than just being a housewife. Back in college, I had dreams of becoming a teacher. I missed learning, being around people, and feeling like I was contributing to something. One evening, while Michael was reading in the living room, I gathered the courage to bring it up. "Michael, can we talk about something?" I asked, sitting next to him. "Of course. What's on your mind?" he replied, putting his book down. "I've been thinking, maybe I could look for a job, or at least some volunteer work. I want to do something more with my time," I said hesitantly. He looked at me, surprised. "But Rachel, you don't need to work. I'm here to take care of everything. Isn't this what you always wanted?" I paused, not wanting to upset him. "I know, and I appreciate that. But I need something of my own, you know? Something that makes me feel fulfilled." Michael sighed, taking my hand. "I just want you to be happy, Rachel. But think about our future, our plans for a family. Don't you think your place is here with me, building that future?" I understood his point, but it didn't sit right with me. Still, I didn't want to argue. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it," I said, forcing a smile. As days turned into weeks, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I focused on being the best wife I could be, cooking meals, keeping the house tidy, and supporting Michael. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself, the part that yearned for independence and a sense of purpose outside our home. Despite these creeping doubts, our life together seemed good on the surface. We were the ideal couple in everyone's eyes. But as the month rolled by, changes in our home became more noticeable. Michael, once so attentive and present, started coming home late, often missing dinner. At first, he would apologize, citing work pressure and important projects. "Sorry, Rachel, work's a nightmare right now. I hope you understand," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. I tried to be understanding. "It's okay, Michael. Work is important. Just don't overdo it, okay?" But deep down, I felt lonely and neglected. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt empty and quiet. I found myself often sitting by the window, waiting for him to come home. One evening, when Michael came home later than usual, I decided to address the growing distance between us. "Michael, we need to talk," I started as he walked through the door. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes. "What is it now, Rachel?" I hesitated, taken aback by his tone. "It's just, you've been coming home late a lot. I miss spending time with you." He sighed, dropping his keys on the table. "Rachel, I'm working hard for us, for our future. You should be grateful, not complaining." I felt a sting at his words. "I am grateful, but I also miss my husband. Is it wrong to want to spend time together?" Michael's face hardened. "Look, I'm doing my best here. Maybe you should find some hobbies or something to keep you busy." His words hurt, but I swallowed the pain. "Maybe you're right," I murmured, even though it felt wrong. The conversations became less frequent after that. Michael grew more distant, and I felt more isolated. I started questioning everything: our marriage, my role as a wife, and my own happiness. It felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One day, I was cleaning the house and found a receipt for a restaurant in Michael's coat pocket. It was dated for a night he said he'd been working late. My heart sank. Confronting him seemed daunting, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I brought it up. "Michael, I found a receipt in your coat. It was for the night you said you were working late," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "So? I grabbed a bite after work. What's the big deal?" "It's not that. It's just, you never mentioned it. Are you sure there's nothing else I should know?" I asked, hoping for honesty. Michael's response was quick and sharp. "Rachel, you're being paranoid. I'm tired of this constant questioning. Can't a man have some peace in his own home?" I recoiled at his words, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Was I wrong to question him? But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me. Feeling the growing distance in our marriage, I knew I needed something to fill the void. The idea of getting a job or doing something meaningful was still on my mind. It was a scary thought, going against Michael's wishes, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I needed this for myself. One morning, after Michael left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I started looking for job openings. There were a few that caught my eye, but one in particular stood out, a teaching assistant position at a local community center. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hesitated for a moment before applying. My heart was racing. This was it, my first real step towards something of my own. When I hit the submit button, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. A few days later, I got a call. They wanted to interview me. I was over the moon, but also nervous about how Michael would react. I decided to keep it to myself until I knew more. The interview went well, and they offered me the position. I was ecstatic. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. But the thought of telling Michael dampened my excitement. That evening, when Michael came home, I gathered all my courage. "Michael, I have something to tell you," I started, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his expression tired. "What is it now, Rachel?" I got a job, as a teaching assistant. It's just part-time," I said quickly, almost in a whisper. Michael's reaction was not what I expected. He just stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. Do what you want, Rachel. I don't have the energy to argue about this. I was taken aback by his indifference. Part of me had hoped he would see this as a positive step, but it seemed he didn't care. Despite his reaction, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The job was rewarding, and I loved interacting with the children and other staff. It was a breath of fresh air, a break from the loneliness and tension at home. With each day at the community center, I felt more confident and independent. It was a small job, but it meant the world to me. It gave me something to look forward to, something that was just mine. But at home, things with Michael were deteriorating. He was home even less, and when he was, we barely spoke. The once warm and loving man I married was now just a stranger passing by in the hallway. The day of our wedding anniversary was bittersweet. The house buzzed with preparations, yet Michael was nowhere to be seen, supposedly tied up with work. My parents fluttered around, trying to make everything perfect, their efforts casting a shadow over the hollow feeling in my heart. Then, in the midst of the controlled chaos, David arrived, his presence like a burst of fresh air. He strode in, carrying not just his charismatic aura, but also his laptop, brimming with stories from his life on the road. "David, what are you doing here?" My mother's voice was sharp, laced with disapproval. "I couldn't miss Rachel's big day, could I?" David replied, his tone light yet defiant. Ignoring the tension, David turned to me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Got something to show you, sis. You won't believe the parties and the people I've met." We sat down in a quiet corner, and he flipped open his laptop. As he scrolled through photos of crowded stages, vibrant parties, and smiling faces, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. These were glimpses into a world so different from mine. Then, in a casual swipe, everything changed. There he was, Michael. In the midst of a raucous party, with a woman clinging to his arm, laughing, carefree, and so very unlike the man I knew. "Wait, who's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to Michael in the photo. David glanced at the screen, nonchalant. "Oh, him. That's just some guy who's been hanging out with us a lot. Real ladies' man, changes girls like he changes guitar strings. Says he's got a boring and stupid wife at home." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Boring. Stupid. Was that how Michael saw me? Before I could process it all, the front door swung open. Michael walked in. His usual mask of composure shattered the moment he saw David. "David, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael's voice was laced with a panic. David looked up, surprise and realization dawning on his face. "Wait a minute. You're the husband? This is your Mike?" The room fell silent. My parents, unaware of the storm brewing, looked on in confusion. Michael's eyes darted between me and David, the color draining from his face. I held up the laptop, the image of him at the party glaring back at us. "Is this what you do on your late nights at work, Michael? Is this who you really are?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. The room spun around me. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in. Betrayal, lies, the facade of our perfect marriage. It all crumbled down in that moment. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a silent pillar of support. My parents were still trying to grasp the situation, their expressions shifting from shock to disappointment. The silence in the room was deafening after David's revelation. I stood there, holding the photo, feeling like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. My parents were staring at Michael, waiting for an explanation. Michael's eyes were fixed on the floor. "Michael, is this true?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and regret. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain this?" I said, my voice rising as I waved the photo. "It was just a mistake, Rachel. It meant nothing. I was just confused," Michael stammered. "A mistake? Confused? For how long have you been lying to me?" My voice was shaking with anger and hurt. "Rachel, please, let's talk about this privately," he pleaded, glancing nervously at my parents and David. "No, Michael, I deserve to know the truth. Here and now," I insisted. My mom stepped forward, her face filled with concern. "Rachel, maybe you two should—" "No, Mom, I need answers," I interrupted, my gaze still fixed on Michael. David was quiet, his expression somber. He put a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. Michael took a deep breath. "It started a few months ago. I was feeling overwhelmed, and she was there. It was a stupid mistake. I love you, Rachel." His words felt like a slap in the face. Love? How could he call this love? "I can't believe this. All those late nights, the times you weren't here." "It was all a lie," I said, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "But you did, Michael. You broke our vows. You broke my trust," I replied, tears streaming down my face. My dad spoke up, his voice stern. "You need to leave, Michael. Now." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my heart. The room was quiet again. My mom came over and hugged me, her embrace warm but unable to comfort the ache in my heart. David stood beside me, his presence a reminder of the family that still stood with me. I felt broken, the illusions of my perfect marriage shattered into a million pieces. But amidst the pain, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of clarity. The truth was out, and now I had to find a way to pick up the pieces and rebuild my life, a life that was mine and mine alone. The days following the revelation were a blur. My parents tried to comfort me, but their words felt distant. David stayed by my side, a silent guardian, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I knew what I had to do. The decision was clear, even through the fog of my pain. I needed to end my marriage with Michael. It wasn't just about his betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. Sitting at the kitchen table, David broke the silence. "You okay, sis?" I looked up, my eyes tired. "I will be. I need to start the divorce process. I can't stay in this marriage." David nodded. "I'm here for you, whatever you need." Meetings with lawyers were emotionally draining. I sat across from Michael at our final meeting, his face filled with remorse. "Rachel, I am so sorry. I never wanted things to end this way," he said, his voice low. "I know, but sorry isn't enough, Michael. You broke our trust, and I need to move on," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He nodded, looking defeated. "I just wish I could make things right." "Some things can't be undone," I said, signing the last of the papers. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I was free from the lies, the deceit. But with that freedom came the realization of my new reality. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life. The following weeks were a time of self-reflection. I spent hours talking with David, who shared his own stories of heartbreak and healing. My parents, though still struggling with their own feelings about the divorce, offered their support. One evening, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, Mom spoke up. "Rachel, we're here for you. You're strong, and you'll get through this." Dad nodded in agreement. "You've always been our rock, even when we didn't see it. We're proud of you." Their words, simple and sincere, touched me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I also threw myself into my work at the community center. The children's laughter and innocence were a balm to my wounded heart. I found joy in small moments, a smile from a child, a successful lesson, a thank you from a parent. In the midst of the fallout, I discovered a resilience within me that I didn't know existed. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt overwhelmed by loneliness and doubt. But I kept moving forward, driven by a newfound determination to live a life that was true to myself. Sitting in the small corner cafe, I cradled a warm cup of coffee, my mind drifting back through the whirlwind of recent events. The steam from the coffee blurred with my thoughts, each memory unfolding like a scene from a distant play. I remembered the day in court, the final decree of our divorce. Michael had sat there, a shadow of the man I once knew. He looked pathetic, his eyes void of the confidence he once carried. It was a stark contrast to the man I married, a sight that stirred a mix of pity and relief in me. Then came the tedious, bitter process of dividing our assets. Michael, who once professed undying love, was now coldly squabbling over every cent. It was a tedious and painful process, stripping away any lingering sentiments I had for the marriage we shared. Perhaps the most vivid memory was the last time I saw Michael. He had come to my doorstep, unannounced, his eyes red and swollen. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading for a second chance. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing but contempt. The tears, the pleas, they meant nothing. They were just the last desperate acts of a man who had lost everything through his own doing. Through all these moments, David was my pillar of strength. He was there in the courtroom, offering silent support with his presence. And on that final encounter with Michael, David stood by my side, a protective force against the man who had broken my trust. As I sat in the cafe, the noise of the bustling city around me, I realized how much I had changed. The naive girl who entered that marriage was gone, replaced by a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. I felt a sense of pride in my newfound independence and resilience. My gaze shifted to the busy street outside the cafe window. People were going about their lives, each absorbed in their own stories. I felt a kinship with them, a shared understanding of the struggles and triumphs life brings. I took a sip of my coffee, its warmth spreading through me. I was starting over, but this time on my own terms. There was a future out there waiting for me, filled with possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready to embrace it, with my past as a lesson and my brother's support as my strength.
Sometimes I cannot breathe when you look at me like that. I'm falling in. You don't even have to speak. I'll be calling out your name. And I thought I could